Hi, dear friends. Some words of Torah for Parshat Vayigash. Yosef's unmasking to his brothers is not the most emotional scene in our Parsha. While the Torah records that Yosef was crying during his revelation, he displayed even greater emotion when he reunited with his maternal brother Binyamin and later with his father Yaakov. In both instances, the Torah states, Vayipol al tzavarav vayevk. He fell on his neck and cried. Clearly, the reunions with his younger brother and father were more impactful because Yosef had mourned all those years of being apart from the people he loved the most. Binyamin was already in Egypt when Yosef revealed himself, but Yaakov had to travel to Egypt to see his son. Yaakov arrived in Goshen, where it had been arranged for the family to settle. The Torah then states that Vayesor Yosef merkavto, Yosef harnessed his chariot and went up to greet his father in Goshen. Why does the Torah have to state that Yosef harnessed his chariot? Why not just start the verse with Vaya'al likrat Yisrael aviv Goshna? Yosef went up to greet his father in Goshen, which are the next words of the verse. Do we need to know how Yosef prepared his travel to Goshen? Rashi, citing the Midrash, derives a moral lesson. Yosef was so excited to see his father to the point where the job of harnessing the animals to his chariot, which was normally assigned to his stable staff, was something he wanted to do himself. In this sense, he was emulating the behavior of his great-grandfather Avraham, who, when told to bring his son on the Akedah, saddled his donkey personally. This is why the Torah there states, Vayachavosh et chamoro, Avraham saddled the donkey himself. So excited was he to do Hashem's bidding that he acted irrationally out of his love for Hashem. Here too, Yosef so missed his father that he wanted to do everything himself in order to join him. There is another midrash that makes a curious connection between Yosef and Paro, who was also described in the Torah as harnessing his chariot. When Bnei Yisrael left Egypt 210 years after the events of our Parsha, the Torah in Parshat Bishalach describes how Paro immediately regretted his decision to let them go and decided to pursue them into the desert. The Torah states, Vayesor et richbo, Paro harnessed his chariot and took his army in pursuit of the Jews. The Midrash states that Yosef's harnessing of his chariot in order to greet his father counteracted and canceled Paro's harnessing of his chariot. What does this Midrash mean? Before we answer that question, let's look at the rest of our verse to see how this tearful reunion between father and son played out. The Torah says that Yosef appeared before his father, fell on his neck, and vayefk al tzavarav od. He commenced to cry on his neck. Rashi tells us that all we see from this verse is that Yosef cried, but we don't at all see any of Yaakov's emotions. Contrast this to when Yaakov reunited with his brother Binyamin. There, the Torah describes a reciprocal crying. Just as Yaakov cried on Binyamin's neck, Ubinyamin bacha al tzavarav, Binyamin also cried on Yosef's neck. Here, however, Yaakov is not described as crying. He was clearly delighted to see Yosef to the point where, in the next verse, he says, Amuta hapam, I can now die in peace, knowing that you're alive. So why didn't Yaakov cry? Rav Hirsch offers an insight into the human condition based on a strange word in this verse. The Torah says, Vayefk al tzavarav od. After falling on Yaakov's neck, Yosef commenced to cry on his father's neck. What does the word od mean in this context? The fact is, Yaakov had never stopped crying. He had spent every day of the last 22 years crying over his son's demise, or so he thought. His life was not filled with any other preoccupation other than thinking about his beloved Yosef. Yosef, on the other hand, had not spent a single day crying in those last 22 years. He couldn't afford to. Just like the gladiator who has to keep his mind in the game in order to survive, Yosef had to spend 22 years surviving one ordeal after another. From day one of his sail to Egypt, he was preoccupied with surviving slavery, surviving Potiphar's household temptations, surviving prison, interpreting dreams, and now acting as the Egyptian viceroy, overseeing the needs of the largest metropolis of the ancient world. It's not that Yosef didn't miss his father. He couldn't allow himself the luxury of indulging in his loss. He even named his firstborn son Menashe, which means God has made me forget all my travails. He realized that his life had to remain focused on his own survival and the eventual realization of those dreams that he had related to his father and brothers. There was no time for anything else. When Yosef reunited with his father stopped crying. It was also the first moment that Yosef allowed himself to begin crying. He didn't just shed tears, he commenced weeping ode, as if to say, the very moment that my father stopped crying, I'm taking over that duty of crying for my father. This is also implied in the first part of the verse. When the Torah says that Yosef harnessed his chariot, it's not just referring to his physical chariot. A chariot represents your power, what sustains you and carries you forward. The Holy Sfarim tell us that Yosef was God's chariot, enabling God to rest his divine presence in Egypt, which is what sustained the Jewish people spiritually while there. What the Torah is telling us is that Yosef took all of his strength, all of his faculties that he had previously devoted toward his and Egypt's survival, and now harnessed that energy toward reuniting with his father. That's what Vayesor means. That's why the reunion was so powerful, because it was the unleashing of 22 years of suppressed emotion. We now better appreciate the Midrash's connection between Yosef's chariot and Paro's chariot. Paro had spent his entire life devoted to Egypt. His empire was built upon ensuring that Egypt would remain the strongest, free from any threats. He cruelly enslaved the Jews only because he viewed them as a threat to his empire. After being forced by the plagues to release them, he quickly changed his mind, realizing that he was relinquishing Egypt's greatest asset, the Jewish slaves. He harnessed his chariot, all of his energies, into the effort of getting the slaves back to Egypt and once again asserting Egypt's place as the world leader. When someone is filled with that level of determination, it is hard to combat it, regardless of the merits of that conviction. Just because someone is on the side of good does not always guarantee that they will be the victor. You also need the absolute harnessing of one's energies towards that virtuous goal in order to succeed and vanquish evil. That is why the Medrash connects the two harnessings, the harnessing of Yosef's chariot and Paro's chariot. Bnei Yisrael was able to emerge victorious and free from Egypt's attack only because we possessed the determination and grit of great tzaddikim who dedicated their entire lives to righteousness and the welfare of the Jewish people. Yosef harnessed his devotion to his father after having suppressed it, and that is what allowed us to successfully leave Egypt. Since October 7th, we have not had the luxury of properly mourning. We've cried, of course, but in order to succeed, we need to put aside the full expression of tears and save them for later. Our righteous people have instead harnessed their chariots, all of their energies and all of their faculties to bring our hostages home and to protect our chayalim and our land. That is the key to upending all the modern-day paros whose twisted ideologies have driven them to brazenly commit atrocities. In order to fight that kind of evil, you need to have the same drive, the same harnessing of the chariot in order to emerge as the victor. As George W. Bush said shortly after 9/11, we will not waver, we will not tire, we will not falter, and we will not fail. Peace and freedom will prevail. It is that same Yosef strength of our people that will bring us, dear friends, to the ultimate redemption. May we see it. Bimheira b'yameinu amen. Here's wishing you a beautiful Shabbos. Shabbat Shalom.